Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Coady.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Coady, and we've got a colleague with us north of the border, Teresa Coady, coming to us from Vancouver out in British Columbia, and just can't wait to get into her career and how she's navigated all things sustainability, green buildings, and what she's up to today. Teresa, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you.
We were talking about Canada earlier, and I can't wait to learn how you got there. But I always want to know your origin story. So, where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
I grew up in Montreal and Toronto, and I moved to Vancouver for university. And I feel like that gave me an East Coast appreciation of academia and history, and a wonderful West Coast appreciation of all things wild. My father was an architect, and he moved the family to the Middle East when I was a teenager. So we traveled a lot. So I have a little piece in there with the international living that brought in my perspective as well. My career start was an actual refusal to be an architect, because my father felt that architects were underappreciated and he begged me not to go into the profession. So I agreed. So I started out in pre-med, but I left that when we had to dissect husky puppies. I literally had to walk out of the lab and reconsider my career. I couldn't do it. And then I moved on to math and physics because I really had an aptitude for that. And I thought I might make a career in that. But I left that when I realized that all funding was in weapons development. And so a group of us walked out there. So I had that pre-med math physics. And then I was really feeling overeducated, but not very well-rounded. So I finished my first degree in fine art. So it wasn't a straight line. And so after all that, math, physics, health sciences, fine art, really architecture was the only graduate program available for me.
And, it sounds like you obviously went to school in British Columbia, but you spent a lot of time overseas too. So you were back and forth a little bit there growing up?
I had a very international lifestyle, let's say, and it broadened my perspective, not just around culture, but also around architecture. And it made me, it opened my mind to many other ways of doing things.
Okay. Yeah, several guests on the podcast that have traveled internationally or studied abroad just really had that influence. So I'm curious, when, because you made a career in architecture for many years, but when did you get the sustainability bug? Did you have an aha moment there?
It's kind of the opposite of, I started my career and then I woke up. I actually was diagnosed with a mild neurological disorder when I was 17. And at that time in my early 20s, I was in architecture, and I realized with my background in health sciences that our industrial cities were making us unwell. So I made it part of my research from the very beginning in university to incorporate health studies. And with my background in math and physics, I realized that while all the other sciences had moved on to the digital age, architecture was still stuck in the industrial age. And we were creating these industrial cities with industrial age buildings that were making everyone, including me, sick. So I did my thesis in 1983 on the living, breathing building, and that set my career path.
Wow, that's kind of funny that you were in living building and healthy buildings, and now we have programs, right? Rating systems like the Living Building Challenge and WELL, and so you were early into that.
Yeah, and we didn't even have the words then. We didn't have the words green building. We didn't have sustainability. Those weren't really terms in the early 80s. Late 70s. And I really had to just follow my own heart and my own instincts because I had this broader background, and I could see that many of my peers in the school were really focused on what was called then postmodernism, which was just a stylistic investigation. And I remember thinking, this is not architecture. Architecture is about shaping our world so that we can all live better. And it's about that inspiration so that we enjoy the spaces that we're in and around every day. So there was a real disconnect for me with the education at the time and my perspective on things, but that was okay.
Now, did you have anyone that was an influence early on, a mentor, anyone that maybe opened some doors for you?
Yeah, nobody famous, but I had a really great professor at the School of Architecture at UBC. His name was Steve Taylor. And all the other professors said that my thesis was not architecture. And he accepted it and ran me through it. And when we finished, I got the top mark. So he was really helpful. I was a bit of an outlier, so I didn't really have a mentor, but I did have, when I started my career, an advocate developer, John Cordonier at Bentall. And he saw what I was trying to do, and he helped me establish my firm with his buildings. So I was very lucky to know him and to have Bentall back all of my construction and take the risk with me that some of the ideas might not work, and some didn't, but a lot did. And I was also, you mentioned it, the weed and the well and all that. Well is recent, but I was very called Cascadia in those days, which was the original Green Building Council. It was Washington, Oregon, British Columbia sort of regional chapter. And we developed a lot of the early concepts that eventually became the certification programs, LEED, and then morphed into Living Building Challenge, and now the WELL, and so many other certification programs. And there were a lot of great architects around here at that time. Peter Busby's one. There were quite a few who were making it their business to not just do their own good work, but try and set up a roadmap for everybody, because LEED is at its heart and is funded as an education program. So that was something that really influenced me, and it was a back and forth thing. And
definitely where it started, Pacific Northwest. You were at the right place, right time, and
exactly
the grassroots. And then next thing you know, I guess the USGBC moved to Washington D.C. eventually, and the LEED buildings came online in 2000, and 19 years later, here we are. So tell us about your architecture firm that you spent 20 years at. What kind of projects did you do there, and what stood out during that time?
Well, I basically came out of school and went to work for my thesis advisor, and we both realized that his rather large firm was stuck and couldn't morph into this new paradigm. So I had to start my own firm in 1992. Actually, I started a small practice in 1990, and then I brought a partner in, and we renamed it in 1992, called it Bunting Coady Architects. And we were tremendously successful. We sold to B+H, which is an international firm, in 2012. And we basically went from 3 people to 300 people. And the practice was based on we create living, breathing buildings. If you ask about the highlights of that journey, there were so many. I think we just didn't know that there were rules, so we just broke them without realizing it, and then looked back and went, oops. But we would build buildings without parkades because we thought, well, there's no feature in the car, really. We would build buildings with grass roads because we thought, well, why do these things have to be asphalt? We would build buildings with glass beads instead of drain rock because we thought, well, why not recycle the glass and incorporate it here? And a lot of things we did landed up changing industries. So that was really exciting. We also realized that the siloed process that we had was a barrier. So in 1998, I presented the integrated design process at the Globe Challenge conference in Vancouver. That was a big moment, I think. That was a big shift for our industry. And again, a lot of people were realizing that we needed to integrate the design process. And I was just sort of the lucky one that got to, really map it out and connect it to real practice and lay it out and present it. Highlights, I won the RBC Woman of the Year Award, which is a Canadian national award, in 2002. First time any architect had ever won it. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, yeah, we've got a lot of recognition and support. And I think that's the thing that is a really good message to anyone listening is if you just go out and do what you think is really right and needs doing, you will get support. Like no one will stand in your way. Everyone will help you. Everyone wants to see that happen. One of the buildings I love, like I say, we did so many, but one that I really love is the Kwantlen University Library. And it was a net zero building in 2008. So, and it's a wonderful building. Students gravitate to it. They go to it whenever the weather is bad and snowstorms. University will be closed and all the students will just
gravitate towards it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. It has like an interior waterfall and
it sounds like, you didn't know any better. Green was the way to go with all those early designs and you had access to a lot of great projects. And I don't know, anything else, Teresa, stand out? Some other of your proudest achievements along the way?
Well, most recently, I'm working with United Nations. I have been working with them, I guess, for about 10 years now, time flies, to raise awareness and set global policy because buildings have such a huge impact on the well-being of people all around the planet. And the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, has really created a movement around this. So we see the COP, COP25, COP21, those meetings that are held with the leaders of countries and have things like the Montreal Protocol developed. All of that is really the work of UNEP, preparing all the materials that these leaders look at and taking the action after the event. So UNEP has been, I think, very important and will continue to be so as we go forward with solutions for our planet. So I find that really exciting that I'm involved in that as an architect.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and we hear more and more about the UN's SDGs. So, would all that be related, or can you clear that up for us?
The Sustainable Development Guidelines, we started out with something called the CCM, which was the Common Carbon Metric.
Okay.
Because people were looking at emissions, and then every country was saying, oh, we're fine. And some people were saying, well, what are we measuring and how are we measuring? So the UNEP group really started out as the group that was trying to create a common language around some of those metrics. And the Common Carbon Metric was almost an appeal group. So for instance, British Columbia went there and said, is our hydropower net zero? And that's not a simple answer because hydroelectric dams have a huge environmental impact, but they don't have the emissions that the coal-fired plants do. And British Columbia, the second issue with that is when British Columbia runs out of power, it brings power in from Alberta, which is coal-fired. And then the third argument was that if you have an electron in the grid, it doesn't know where it came from. Did it come from a hydro dam? Did it come from a coal-fired plant? So, basically, British Columbia was allowed to call hydroelectric. United Nations Environmental Program was originally set up to address some of the emissions issues. And the first thing we did was create the Common Carbon Metric. That was a way of determining when a country said that they had such a level of emissions that they were all measuring the same way. And British Columbia, for instance, went and said, can you arbitrate for us? Because there were various groups that couldn't agree. And the United Nations said, yes, they could. And what the question for British Columbia was is the hydroelectric power grid that we have here net zero? And the final answer was, yes, it is. But the opposing opinions were, well, it's supported and supplemented by coal-fired electricity. There is an environmental impact, a hydroelectric dam, and we can't ignore that. And when an electron is in the North American grid, it's just one grid, it doesn't really know where it came from. And so is it fair to say that one region is 100% carbon neutral when the rest of North America is not? So anyway, it was just one of those things. But this group has been very involved with trying to help governments at all levels set policy to first reduce emissions, but now we've moved on to connecting the dots with the habitat issues as well, because buildings and the pipelines and the bridges and the roads and everything that we call construction has a huge impact on the surface of our planet, and the habitat and eco corridors that we impact need to be considered. And so far, we haven't done a great job of that. in our industry. So that's why I really like working with the United Nations Environmental Program, because I think it's a vehicle to get some of this information out and to make these changes in policies.
Gotcha. Okay. No, thanks for clearing that up. Fast forward to today, though. What's keeping you busy today in your new role?
One of the things I'm doing is I'm working with the government of Canada to address wildfires and set new codes to protect people. So that's good to know. And we're also working with California groups. So it's a very North American effort. Also working with United Nations, as I just said. And we are trying to change the message now from control emissions and climate change to 1.5 degrees. That message isn't really resonating with people. So we're looking at maybe design for life, because that's the ultimate message we need to get out there. And on that note, I have a new book called Rebuilding Earth. It's North Atlantic Books, San Francisco. It'll be distributed by Random House. They say February 2020, but I don't know how these things go. It's my first book, maybe my only book. But it's called Rebuilding Earth, and the subtitle is Designing Eco-Conscious Habitats for Humans. So that's a book that everyone said, you have to write a book, so I finally did it. Yeah.
Can we link to it? I'd love to put the link to it in the show notes. I guess it's coming out a little later.
Yeah, it'll be coming out. It will be called Rebuilding Earth. We know that. And it will be distributed by Random House, published by North Atlantic Books. And it should be out 2020.
Good. No, congratulations. It's a huge deal. Yeah, they say all of us have a book in us, so you did it.
Yeah.
What do you think the green building movement would be shifting next? If you had a crystal ball, what should we be reading up on?
You know what? It's already shifting. It's shifting to the digital age out of the industrial age. And what that means is we have the incorporation of metadata into city planning. We have building information modeling, BIM, leading to offsite construction, printed buildings, printed building components. Energy modeling is already a big part of our lives. We're seeing LIDAR mapping of eco-corridors and underground waterways. We're seeing networked rather than remote centralized. We're seeing networked local waste-to-energy systems. So there is a huge shift happening, and we're not talking a lot about it, but I think it's great. And that is really why I wrote my book, because I saw that, construction was stuck in the industrial age, and all these shifts were happening around us and all the other industries except ours, but we're moving in little pieces. So I thought if I could write this book about it, then people would see, I'm part of the whole picture. This is the way forward. I'm going to make choices going this way. So I have what I call 12 principles of conscious construction. And they're not really my principles. I just sort of organized them and translated a lot of research in a very simple format so that everybody can realize that 25% of the world's population is engaged in construction. So that's like a quarter of the people on the planet either are building or designing or even doing the furniture and the materials that go into the buildings. It's a huge human effort. And until now, we've really been prioritizing, I think a little bit incorrectly, not realizing the impact we have on our planet. So that's why I came up with these 12 principles. Would you like to hear them?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. There's 12 of them, like I say, they're not just my ideas. They're obviously my way of organizing things, which can sometimes be a little different, but is always easy to understand. So the very first principle is design for life, not machines. And by that, I mean protect the habitats and the eco-corridors and support our life. Because when you look at how we build now, the first question we get asked is, okay, we got to put a parkade in, and where do the columns go? And then those telescope up through the building. Or we have a building site and we have to step back for the roads. So it's all about the roads and the cars. And then inside the building, it's all about the systems, the lighting systems, the HVAC systems, the water pump systems, the sprinkler systems. And then humans kind of get the leftover pieces of the floor plate and the leftover pieces of the land. So I'd like to flip that around and say, well, design for life first, not machines. Second principle is protect all waters and wetlands, discharge nothing to the oceans. And I learned an awful lot when I was researching this book. And one of my favorite books is called Universal Water by West Marin. And he talks about the water you thought you knew and how amazing it actually is, right down to the hydrogen bond and how active it is as a greenhouse gas, for instance. So let's protect all waters and wetlands, discharge nothing to the oceans is number 2. Number 3 is restore and protect all forests, keep cities green. And there's a lovely little book I love called The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wolleben. And he talks about the intelligence and the communication between trees. And one of the concepts that I introduce here, I don't think people know a lot about, is I've sort of forgotten the exact percentage, but a very large percentage, I think it's more than 50% of human population will be living in coastal cities by mid-century. And the issue with that is all our cities read as deserts. So when nature is looking at the surface of the earth and it sees runoff, whether it's a roof going into a drain or a road going into a culvert, it just says, oh, this must be a desert. And when we have a desert at the edge of the ocean, which is what we have when we have coastal cities, it interferes with the ocean atmosphere rain cycle and it creates drought 400 miles inland. And this is why I believe this is one of the contributing factors to the wildfires that we're seeing, is that we've created these coastal deserts with our cities, and we've disturbed the natural cloud formation and precipitation for the inland zones. So that's why it's so important to protect the forests and keep the cities green. Number 4 is restore and protect eco corridors and abandon the paved grid. There's a little quote I love. It's called, "Islands are where species go to die." And whenever we grid off a city block or a whole city, we've created an island, and ultimately that surface of the planet will atrophy and die. So we need to really realize that nature lives in ribbons. It lives in rivers, ocean coasts, mountain ranges, forest corridors, and we build in grids and islands. And so the book I really like about that one is Elizabeth Colbert's The Sixth Extinction. And that's obviously gaining a lot of traction right now. People are really becoming aware of the habitat loss and the extinction. The other principles, I've got number 5, which is use solar first. Number 6, which is embrace distributed energy systems first. Number 7, which is limit man-made CO2 emissions, discharge no toxins or pollutants to the atmosphere. Number 8, regulate EMFs, mandate EPDs, build only what is needed. That's one that we don't hear a lot about. We talk a lot about solar, distributed energy emissions, but we don't hear a lot about the fact that we're overbuilt. We've built 20% more homes than we have family units in North America, Europe, and China. We don't hear that there is a human scale that we're comfortable in, and when we go beyond that, we cause all kinds of anxieties and stresses. We don't hear that for millennia, we have sited our buildings carefully based on earth energies. And now we don't even know what those are, and we don't measure them, but they do exist. And there are some great, we were talking earlier about technology and the digital age and how that's changing things. Well, one of the things that's changing is we're getting these great maps of the earth energies, and we can see vortexes, and we can see concentrations, and we can see barren areas. And it's really interesting to know that ancient peoples could sense those energies and build to them.
Love it.
Yeah. So there's a book I like. There is Brain Rules by John Medina. I just think it's pretty cool the way he explains how we have 3 brains, the sort of ancient reptilian brain and the limbic mammalian brain, and then the neocortex on top, and how each of those resonates to some of those earth frequencies. And, you know, that to know that we're built like that and to not address it, to me seems like a huge omission. Then number 9 is design for speech, music, and dance, eliminate noise pollution, and restore natural sounds. And what I didn't realize when I started this book, even though I had found that when we researched our buildings and did post-occupancy evaluations, nobody complained about the air quality. Nobody complained about the light. Nobody complained about the temperature. Everybody complained about noise. And it didn't matter whether it was an office building, hospital, university classroom building, residential, it didn't matter. The only thing that people complain about in cities and dense situations, for the most part, when you look at the gross data, is noise. And again, that's because of the way our brains work. We're very sensitive to alarm sounds. We seek out natural sounds, and they cause us to relax and know that if every bird is tweeting and the wind is blowing normally, then everything is good. There are no threats. But when we don't have that background sound and we hear these sharp noises, or what we call noise, it raises our level of stress and our cortisol response. We also have very differentiated parts of our brain for speech and music. And that's why it's really hard to acoustically separate things out, because we really hear speech and we really hear music. They're just brighter and louder to us than the background noises. So anyway, that became a very important principle of conscious construction, understanding that we have to eliminate that noise pollution and restore natural sounds.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Number 10 is restore natural connections. Richard Love wrote a book called Last Child in the Woods, and that's a great exploration of how, especially our children, are tuned to develop their confidence and their empathy in nature. And when we deprive them of that, we stunt their physical skill growth and their emotional growth. And restoring natural connections is I think, hugely important principle. Second to last principle, measure happiness first. And again, a lot of studies, but when I look at a building or a campus that I might have done, I can tell if it worked because everyone just goes there because they're happy to be there. And, if you're in an office where everyone's getting along, you're running a company and you're like, is my company doing okay or not okay? You walk in, hear laughter, you're doing okay. And no matter how big or small things are, if you're looking at a country, if you can measure happiness, we're all designed to be happy. And so many times we lose sight of that when we're engaged in construction, that our ultimate goal is to make people happy. And the final principle of conscious construction is to balance financial production, social, human, and environmental capitals. Right now, we're really only looking at the 2 GDP capitals, which are financial and production. And without measuring our social capital, our human capital, and our environmental capital, we really can't move forward because we're impoverishing ourselves as we destroy our environmental capital, as we undermine our human capital, which is our health and well-being, and as we dissolve our social capital, which is our resilience and our ability to work together. So no matter how much money we make or how much stuff we produce, if we're destroying our environment, making ourselves sick, and isolating and fracturing our communities, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, no, I can tell you've pulled together all these best practices. You referenced some other books and some of your own original thought, and that's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I thought someone else would have done this, and when I spoke to the various agents and publishers, they're like, no one's really looked at it through this lens. And I don't know if that's just because architects and engineers are so busy, we don't have time to write books, or we just don't see it as anything but the baseline everyone would know. But for me, it was amazing how what we do in the construction industry is so connected to all other fields of research, and how much research there is out there and how little of it gets out to people. So that's what I'm hoping with this book, is that people will find this interesting and make the connections that I've made, and they will see their way to a new future and a much better future.
Absolutely. And we'll link to the book. I know it's coming out soon, so we can always update the show notes here. But any other thoughts there as we finish out the list?
No, I think there's something called sort of wrapping it up. There was something called a comprehensive wealth model, because I believe that we build the way we do and we put up with all the stuff we put up within our cities because we believe that we're creating wealth and affluence for ourselves. But if you look at this new model, you can look it up, comprehensive wealth model, you can really see what true wealth is and how we don't have to sacrifice our comfort and our social connections and our environment to really become affluent. In fact, when we do that, we're eroding our wealth.
That's good. No, I'm enjoying learning here, and I can't wait to get a copy of your book. Just a couple more questions here, Teresa, as we kind of wrap up. Just a couple quick ones. One is, productivity, or what kind of rituals do you have that maybe have helped you through your career to stay on point? Do you have any habits or rituals that you stick to?
Just the way I live, I always try and do wildland walks because that reconnects me, centers me. I love to do ocean dives. Big fan. Anytime I can get in the water, I get in the water. I do daily meditation, just centers me. I read very widely, and I travel intentionally. So if I never get on a plane again in my life, I'll be fine because I've seen so much of the world. But if I want to, have an experience and see something, I'll usually try and combine it with a necessary trip for a conference or something.
Sure.
And really deepen my understanding of how people live.
Love it. No, that's really cool. Well, that's a good segue to a bucket list. Maybe you've done a lot of travel, but is there anything else maybe on your bucket list you could share?
There's only two things right now. One is really get my book published and out there. And the other one is to work with the United Nations and change the message to build for life, which is my first principle, and hope that resonates with people. That's
amazing. And lastly, there's some listening that are just now jumping into the green building movement. So, Teresa, any words of encouragement for them?
This is where I really think that all young people just need to know their own power. And everyone in our construction industry has a huge impact. We design and build buildings, but we also do the roads, the pipelines, the dams, the bridges, all the utilities, and all of the parks and plazas that service them. And we are reshaping our planet, and we have a great impact. We are the stewards. We are the intelligence of the planet. So we need to take action.
Love it. Love it. Well, this has been Teresa Coady coming to us from British Columbia. Amazing book coming out. We're going to link to that, and just want to say thanks for what you've done to the industry. You've, humble and soft-spoken about it, but you've done a lot. You really have. And just thanks for sharing some of your story with us here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Charlie.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.